me now from Southern California, board-certified psychiatrist, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Doctor, it's fascinating to me that we see these stories come. It's terrible to hear some of them, and some are worse than others, obviously, and some of them are criminal. I don't know about this lady, this latest incident with Al Franken, whether it's criminal or not. I don't even know the context of the thing, but I do know that it's another woman coming forward talking about some sort of unwanted sexual advance. So what is it about these victims that they wait many, many years? In this case, this was, I believe, in 2006, so 11 years later. We've heard cases of, 20 years later. The case in Alabama, you're talking 30-something years later. What is it that is making these victims, if they are victims, we don't know for sure, but we believe they are if they're telling the truth, what makes them wait to come forward?
Well, these women will give you lots of different reasons. They were afraid nobody would believe them. This woman actually, this had to do with a USO tour that they were on, and she said she didn't want to make a big fuss on the tour and so on. But really, I think there is an incredible phenomenon happening now. I mean, yes, that was obviously a very unpleasant experience. He took advantage of his power, but he didn't rape her. And if you look at how she describes this event, she doesn't exactly look like she's devastated. Rather, she looks like she's enjoying being very dramatic about what happened.
Now, you're going down a path here that's going to get me in trouble because I have a Y chromosome, but I'm going to go down a little bit with you, and that is, are we, in this, in a sense, there are some people who have committed crimes out there for sure, but I'm going to use the term witch hunt here. And it seems as though it's going to be tough whenever this ends, whenever this comes to some sort of conclusion. It's going to be tougher for men in general to have a civil conversation, whether it's at work or maybe in a social setting. It's going to be tougher for men to have a conversation without worrying about being accused of something.
Yes, I mean, there's no flirting anymore. Now that's sexual harassment. And, a lot of it has to do with the fact that these men, particularly men in Congress or celebrities, when women come out against them and sort of, Me Too, and I know that this isn't a very popular opinion, and people probably being shocked that a woman would say these things, but a lot of it could be for, in some cases are absolutely devastating. These women's lives have been devastated by this event, but it's also a lot of 15 minutes of fame. I work as a forensic psychiatrist, an expert witness. I've been involved in many sexual harassment cases on both sides, and what's interesting is that a lot of times, and yes, a lot of times it's true and the men have done horrible things, but then there are also women who, it was a consensual kind of thing, and then the man doesn't leave his wife, so all of a sudden their consensual relationship is now sexual harassment. Or, also typically, the woman was sexually abused as a child, and consciously or unconsciously, she projects this abuse years later onto this man.
Now, that's interesting. That's interesting. Because, in other words, she's harboring something and as you said, is now projecting on someone else for whatever psychological reason. But on the other side of the coin, especially in the United States Congress, there is a tremendous amount of power that these true sexual predators can put on these lower-level staffers, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like in Washington and in Hollywood, where there's this big power differential, and where women are trying to climb to the top, perhaps more strongly than in other situations. Men can and do take advantage of the power that they hold over the women.
Does it bother you at all that this is all coming out the way it is in almost a drip kind of fashion? That now all of a sudden it's a he said, she said situation, and Al Franken on this one, he comes out right away and apologizes, and he says, I remember it differently, but he's issuing an apology. But when you look at the big picture, this is a tremendous, in my opinion, this is a tremendous amount of power that we're deeming to 51% of the population. And by that, I mean that a woman can come forward and may have an axe to grind and take out a politician's career, or someone who's not even a politician, an actor's career. This is a real possibility.
Yes, it absolutely is. And it's really, you know, the public, it's become a frenzy. And it's almost like, you know, with the Me Too, it's like women want to show, some women want to show that they too are super attractive and that a man couldn't resist doing whatever it is that he did to her. So that's part of it too. But all of these cases need to be investigated, you know, like a regular lawsuit, a regular trial, before any conclusions can be reached.
And I don't want to say, and I'm not degrading and diminishing any of the true cases of sexual assault at all. There are those cases out there, and those people need to be prosecuted and held accountable when you can. Of course, if it's 30 years later, there's this thing called the statute of limitations, and then for someone who's in the courthouse a lot, you understand why the statute of limitation exists. That is because memories fade, they blur, you know, there are possible psychological problems in between when this event occurred and now.
Right.
And also you can't mount a proper defense or prosecution.
Yes, it gets harder and harder. And you know, this is really part of the bigger picture, which is that the war between the sexes in all different ways has been growing and getting more violent in a sense than ever. And that's really the big picture, that that men and women, you know, our sex roles are confused now. There's a whole, so many people are so confused and so hurt that it's really hard to understand what's going on.
Could this backfire in terms of hiring for women? For example, if you're an employer and you think, hey, this is an attractive woman, maybe I shouldn't hire her and have her on the team just in case?
That's a good point, yes. I think probably, at least unconsciously, there will be some people who do decide that. And yes, talking about women, you mentioned before about women using their sexuality. This woman who's coming out against Al Franken, ironically, she is or was at the time a model for Playboy. So here she did earn her living, at least part of it, by making herself and enjoying her seductiveness to men, and now she's blaming him. Not that that gives men the right to touch, but still, you know, you have to look at that side of it.
How does this all play out in your mind? How does this end? I mean, obviously we're riding some sort of wave here right now of this kind of thing coming out and people coming forward and accusations are flying from coast to coast. How does this whole thing play out in your mind? How does it become resolved as a society?
Well, what it's doing is pushing men and women farther from each other, making them angrier at each other, more fearful of each other, and that's why you have so much of the population not getting married, being afraid of letting themselves be vulnerable, to fall in love. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like there's a whole bigger picture to here that needs to be addressed. And
I think the bottom line here is, like I've told my daughter, and that is, if you're ever assaulted in any way, shape, or form, if you're ever harmed in any way, you come forward right now, right away, and you address the situation. And by the way, don't be afraid to punch him right in the kisser. Carole, doctor, thank you.
Thank you.